The letter arrived while I was prepping for dinner service at Bistro Nouveau. Plain white envelope, expensive paper. No return address, just my name written in elegant cursive that screamed old money. I almost missed it among the produce invoices and vendor catalogs on my desk. My name is Jenna, and until that moment, my biggest concern was perfecting the new winter menu for one of the city's most acclaimed restaurants. Funny how a single piece of paper can turn your world sideways. "Chef, the new sous vide machine is acting up again," my line cook Marco called from the kitchen. "Just a sec," I replied, sliding my thumb under the envelope's flap. Inside was a single note card with the same precise handwriting. "Dear Jenna, the Whitakers aren't who you think they are. Neither is your husband. Ask about the summer of '89 and the closed restaurant on Cedar Street. A friend." My hands trembled slightly as I read it again. 3 years of marriage to Ethan, and I thought I knew everything about the Whitakers, their old money status, their social connections, and especially Barbara, my mother-in-law, with her perfectly coordinated outfits and subtle way of making me feel like I'd never quite belong. My phone buzzed. "Speaking of Barbara, darling, don't forget dinner tonight. I'm making my famous coco vin, though perhaps you could bring a dessert? Something professional this time." I gritted my teeth, remembering last month's dinner when she'd called my chocolate soufflé quaint and almost restaurant quality, coming from someone who considered heating up frozen hors d'oeuvres to be cooking. That was rich. "Of course, Barbara. Looking forward to it." I lied, already dreading another evening of veiled criticism and Ethan's careful neutrality. I glanced back at the letter. Cedar Street was in the old restaurant district, mostly gentrified now into boutiques and coffee shops. What could have happened there in 1989 that someone wanted me to know about? "Chef," Marco called again, more urgently this time. "The machine's making weird noises." I tucked the letter into my pocket, trying to focus on the immediate crisis. But as I helped Marco troubleshoot the equipment, my mind kept drifting back to those words. The Whitakers aren't who you think they are. Maybe it was time to find out exactly who they were, starting with whatever happened on Cedar Street. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally have something to serve back to Barbara besides humble pie. The lunch rush was just winding down when Barbara swept into my restaurant like she owned it, trailing Chanel No. 5 in judgment in her wake. I spotted her from the kitchen pass, settling into our best table with 2 women I recognized from her country club set. "Your mother-in-law's here," Marco whispered unnecessarily. As if I could miss her, perfectly coiffed and examining our wine list like it was evidence in a murder trial. I straightened my chef's coat and headed out. Better to face this head-on. "Barbara, what a surprise," I said, forcing a smile. "I didn't know you were coming in today." "Oh, Jenna dear," she air-kissed my cheek. "I was just telling the ladies about my son's little restaurant. We simply had to try it." My son's restaurant. Of course. Never mind that I was the executive chef and had built this place's reputation from the ground up. "What can I get you ladies?" They ordered practically everything on the menu, the most expensive items, naturally. Barbara insisted on modifications to each dish that would completely alter their integrity. "And the sauce on the side, dear. You know how particular I am." 2 hours later, they were still camping at the table, Barbara holding court while picking at her deconstructed dishes. I was in the middle of prep for dinner service when my server Jenny appeared, looking uncomfortable. "Chef, your mother-in-law's party left. They said to put it on the family tab." My knife paused mid-chop. "We don't have a family tab." Jenny shifted nervously. "That's what I told them, but Mrs. Whitaker said to talk to you about it. The bill's over $400. I set down my knife, my hands shaking slightly. This wasn't about lunch. This was Barbara marking her territory. I pulled out my phone to call Ethan, then stopped. What would he do? Make excuses for her, probably. Tell me I was overreacting. The mysterious letter from yesterday suddenly felt heavier in my pocket. The Whitakers aren't who you think they are. Well, Barbara was certainly proving that point. I reached for my personal credit card. "Ring it through, Jenny. And next time Mrs. Whitaker comes in, she'll need a reservation. Like everyone else." My phone buzzed, a text from Barbara. "Lovely lunch, dear. Though the duck was a touch overdone. Perhaps you could benefit from some of my old recipes." I stared at the message, thinking about Cedar Street and whatever happened in '89. Maybe it was time to do some digging. Because this wasn't just about an unpaid lunch bill. This was Barbara testing how much she could get away with. And I was done being her doormat. Maya's text caught me off guard. "You need to see this now." Attached was a screenshot from one of those local society blogs Barbara and her friends practically lived on. My stomach dropped as I read the headline. Rising chef or social climber? The truth about the Whitakers' new edition. I called Maya immediately. Tell me this isn't what I think it is. It gets worse, she said. Keep reading. The article was a masterpiece of carefully worded accusations, suggesting I'd orchestrated my whole relationship with Ethan to climb the social ladder. It quoted anonymous sources close to the family, describing how I'd pursued him relentlessly, using my position as a caterer at a Whitaker family event to sink my hooks in. That's not even how we met, I said, my voice shaking. We met at a wine tasting. Barbara knows that. Barbara's fingerprints are all over this, Maya said. The writer's one of her bridge club friends. I heard the front door open. Ethan coming home from work. Ich kafa bak. He found me in the kitchen, still staring at my phone. Rough day, he asked, loosening his tie. Did you see the article? His hesitation told me everything. Mom mentioned something about it. She says it'll blow over if we just ignore it. Ignore it? I slammed my phone down. Your mother is publicly suggesting I trapped you into marriage, and you want me to ignore it? Come on, Jen. You know how these society blogs are. Nobody takes them seriously. Except your mother's entire social circle, who happen to make up half our restaurant's regular customers. I could feel 3 years of swallowed frustrations rising up. And what about that unpaid lunch bill yesterday? Did she mention that? He rubbed his temples. Look, I'll talk to her. When? Because you've been saying that for 3 years, and somehow it never happens. She's just protective, he said weakly. She wants what's best for me. And I don't. The words hung between us like a wall. You know what? I did some digging about Cedar Street today. His face changed instantly. What about Cedar Street? Someone sent me a letter about what happened there in '89. Want to tell me about it? Ethan's normally perfect composure cracked. Who sent you that letter? Does it matter? What matters is you've never mentioned it, and clearly it's something I should know about. He grabbed his keys. I need some air. We can talk about this later. As the door closed behind him, I realized something. He hadn't denied knowing about the article before it was published. He'd known what his mother was planning, and he'd done nothing to stop it. The Whitakers aren't who you think they are. Finally, I was starting to understand exactly what that meant. Thanksgiving at the Whitaker mansion was always a performance, but this year felt different. Maybe it was the mysterious letter still burning a hole in my pocket. Or maybe it was the way Barbara kept, accidentally, referring to me as the help instead of her daughter-in-law. I'd spent 3 days preparing a menu that merged traditional dishes with modern techniques, my attempt at bridging our worlds. The turkey was brining, sides were prepped, and I was just finishing the cranberry gastrique when Barbara glided into her kitchen like she'd been summoned by the sound of someone else cooking in her domain. Oh dear, she said, peering into my saucepan. That's creative, though perhaps we should stick to the traditional sauce? The recipe's been in the family for generations. Before I could respond, Aunt Helen appeared in the doorway. Barbara, leave the poor girl alone. I saw that article you planted about her, by the way. Barbara's perfectly maintained smile didn't waver. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Cedar Street, Helen said quietly. Does Jenna know about that yet? The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Barbara's hand trembled slightly as she set down her wine glass. Helen, that's ancient history. Is it? Helen turned to me. Dear, has anyone ever told you about the restaurant that used to be there? The one that. That's enough. Barbara snapped. Jenna, the turkey smells overdone. I checked the temperature probe, perfect 165 degrees. It's exactly right, actually. What about Cedar Street, Helen? But Ethan chose that moment to walk in. Mom, the Hendersons just arrived. They're asking for you. As Barbara rushed out, Helen caught my eye and mouthed later, before following her. The dinner itself was excruciating. Barbara had rearranged my carefully plated dishes, adding her own touches that completely threw off the balance I'd planned. Every bite was accompanied by her running commentary about modern chefs who overthink things. Remember when cooking was about nurturing family, not showing off? She said, pushing away her barely touched plate. In my day, we understood that. I watched Ethan stare at his plate, saying nothing. Just like he'd said nothing about the article, nothing about the unpaid lunch bill, nothing about Cedar Street. Actually, I heard myself say, I'd love to hear about your day, Barbara. Especially your time on Cedar Street. The clatter of silverware stopped. Barbara's face went pale, then red. But it was Ethan's reaction that hit hardest. He reached for his mother's hand, not mine. In that moment, I finally understood. This wasn't just about Barbara's criticism or social status. This was about secrets that could destroy the perfect family image she'd built. And my husband had chosen his side long ago. The flu hit me 3 days before Christmas, turning me into a congested, feverish mess. I could barely lift my head, let alone prepare the elaborate holiday feast Barbara was expecting. When I called to tell her I needed to modify our plans, her response was immediate and cutting. "Oh, darling. How convenient." Her voice dripped with honey-coated venom. "Just when you're expected to prove yourself worthy of the Whitaker name." I pressed a cold compress to my forehead. "I have a 102-degree fever, Barbara." "Well, I suppose we could cancel. Though the Ashworths are coming, and they're such important investors in Ethan's firm." My phone buzzed with another call, Maya. I switched over gratefully. "Save me. Already on it." I called that high-end catering service you mentioned. They can do the whole spread, traditional with a twist. Just like you would. I hesitated. Using a catering service for a Whitaker family dinner was practically blasphemy. But then I remembered Thanksgiving and Barbara's smug face as she rearranged my carefully plated dishes. "Book them," I said. The day of the dinner, I dragged myself downstairs in my robe, having given the caterers detailed instructions. They were setting up when Barbara arrived early. Of course she did. She stood in the doorway, face frozen in horror. "What is this?" "Professional catering," I said, my voice raspy. "Since I'm too sick to cook." "Professional," she sputtered. "You're supposed to be a chef. What will people think?" "They'll think I'm human." I met her gaze steadily. "And that sometimes humans get sick." "I knew it," she hissed. "You're trying to embarrass us. Just like that scene you caused at Thanksgiving about Cedar Street. Actually, I'm trying to take care of myself. Something this family seems allergic to." Ethan walked in, took one look at the situation, and immediately went into peacekeeper mode. "Mom, the food looks amazing. Jenna made a good call." "Of course you'd say that," Barbara snapped. "You've always been weak when it comes to her." The room went silent. Even the caterers stopped moving. I watched my husband's face, waiting for him to finally stand up to his mother. Instead, he turned to me. "Maybe we should have discussed this decision together?" Something broke inside me then. Not dramatically, but quietly, like ice cracking under pressure. I'd spent 3 years trying to prove myself worthy of the Whitaker name. But maybe the real question was whether the Whitakers were worthy of me. I walked upstairs without another word, leaving them to their perfect family dinner. It was time to make some decisions of my own. The catering bill arrived the next morning. $2,800 for a Christmas dinner I was too sick to eat. I stared at it over my coffee, still feeling feverish but now burning with something else too. 3 years of swallowing my pride, of letting Barbara steamroll over every boundary, of watching Ethan choose peace over principle. My phone buzzed. "Aunt Helen. Check your email, dear. I found something you should see." The attachment was a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1989. Local restaurant shuttered amid scandal. And there was Barbara's face, 30 years younger but wearing the same superior expression. She'd been a chef too, it turned out, until her restaurant on Cedar Street collapsed amid accusations of stolen recipes and financial misconduct. I was still reading when Barbara swept in, uninvited as usual. "I brought soup," she announced. "Since you were too indisposed for proper cooking yesterday." I held up my phone. "Interesting reading about Cedar Street, Barbara. Is that why you've been so threatened by my career? Because yours ended in disgrace." The soup container hit the counter with a crack. "Who gave you that? Does it matter? What matters is you've spent 3 years trying to destroy my reputation because you couldn't maintain yours. You know nothing about the stolen recipes, the investors you defrauded, or how your family covered it all up to protect the precious Whitaker name." Her face went white. "I did what I had to do. For my family. For Ethan." "No," I said, sliding the catering bill across the counter. "You did it for yourself. Just like everything else. $2,800, Barbara. That's what your perfect Christmas dinner cost." She laughed, a brittle sound. "And you expect us to pay for your little act of rebellion? Actually, I expect you to finally face consequences. I've already forwarded those articles to your precious social circle. Let's see how they feel about your judgment now." The door opened, Ethan. Perfect timing, as usual. "Mom." He looked between us. "What's going on?" "Your wife is trying to blackmail me," Barbara said, tears appearing on cue. "After everything I've done for her." I waited for the familiar capitulation in Ethan's eyes. But this time I didn't stay to watch. "The bill's due in 30 days, I said, grabbing my coat. "And Barbara, those recipes you stole, they weren't even good enough to steal." As I walked out, I heard Ethan calling after me. But for the first time, I didn't turn back. I'd finally found my breaking point, and maybe, just maybe, my strength too. The mysterious letter that started all this was still in my pocket. Whoever sent it had given me more than just information. They'd given me the push I needed to finally stand up for myself. Maya helped me pack while I tried to ignore the constant buzzing of my phone. Ethan had finally found his voice, it seemed, just not in person. "You can stay with me as long as you need," Maya said, zipping up my suitcase. Though knowing Barbara, she'll probably try to evict me from my apartment too. The doorbell rang. We both froze. "If that's Ethan," Maya started. "It's not." I knew who it was. The same way I'd known this confrontation was coming since I'd exposed Barbara's past. Barbara stood on my doorstep, looking less polished than I'd ever seen her. "We need to talk." "Actually, we don't." I tried to close the door, but she blocked it with her foot. "The board is meeting tomorrow," she said. "About your restaurant's lease." My stomach dropped. The restaurant's building belonged to one of the Whitaker family's investment groups. Of course Barbara would go after my career. It was the only thing she truly understood about me. "You can't." "Can I?" Her smile was razor-sharp. "You exposed my past. Did you think there wouldn't be consequences? The difference is I exposed the truth. You're just proving it. Det truth." She laughed bitterly. "The truth is you're just like me. Ambitious. Ruthless. Willing to do whatever it takes to succeed. The only difference is I admit it." "No," I said quietly. "The difference is I don't destroy people to make myself feel powerful." "Really?" She pulled out her phone, showing me the social media storm my revelation had created. "Then what do you call this?" I thought about the mysterious letter that started it all, about Cedar Street, about 3 years of subtle degradation and manipulation. "I call it karma," I said. "And you're right, I am ambitious. But I built my success. I didn't steal it." Ethan appeared behind her, because of course he did. "Jenna, please. We can fix this." "Fix what?" I asked. "Your mother's attempts to destroy my career? Her years of manipulation? Or your complete inability to stand up to her?" "I'm trying." "No, you're not. You're doing what you always do, showing up at the last minute, hoping to smooth things over without actually solving anything." Barbara smiled triumphantly. "See, she's always been ungrateful." "Grateful?" I laughed. "For what? The constant criticism? The social sabotage? Or the way you taught your son that love means never standing up for what's right?" I grabbed my suitcase, pushing past them both. "Keep the restaurant lease. I'll start over. But remember this. I'm not leaving because you won, Barbara. I'm leaving because I finally realized that winning doesn't matter as much as being free." The look on their faces as I walked away? That was better than any revenge I could have planned. 6 months later, I opened my own restaurant in a small storefront across town. No fancy investors, no family connections, just my savings and a loan from people who believed in my cooking, not my last name. The morning of our opening, I found another letter on my desk. Same elegant handwriting, same expensive paper. "You did better than I ever could. B." I almost threw it away, but curiosity won out. Inside was a key and an address, the old Cedar Street location. I went there that afternoon, finding Barbara waiting in what was now an empty storefront. "Helen told me she sent you that first letter," she said, not turning around. "She thought it would force us to face our similarities." "We're not similar. Aren't we?" She finally faced me. "Ambitious women who loved cooking more than playing society wife? The difference is you were stronger than I was. You chose your passion over appearances." She handed me a worn leather folder. Inside were recipes, dozens of them, written in faded ink. "The ones I stole," she said quietly. "I've spent 30 years pretending they were mine. It's time they went to someone who'll do them justice." "Why now?" "Because you showed me what I could have been if I'd had your courage." She smiled sadly. "The board voted yesterday. The restaurant's yours if you want it. No strings, no Whitaker name attached. I don't need your charity." "It's not charity. It's atonement." She headed for the door, then paused. "Ethan filed for divorce yesterday. He's finally standing up to me. Too late for you, but maybe not too late for himself." After she left, I sat in that empty space where her dreams had died, holding the recipes she'd built her reputation on. I thought about revenge, about justice, about the fine line between winning and losing. That evening, at my restaurant's opening, I served one special dish, a modified version of one of Barbara's stolen recipes. Not because I'd forgiven her, but because I finally understood that the best revenge wasn't destroying your enemies. It was surpassing them. Maya raised her glass during the celebration. "To new beginnings?" To old recipes and new courage, I said, watching the dining room fill with people who were there for my food, my vision, my truth. Later that night, I wrote 2 letters. One to Helen, thanking her for that first push toward freedom, and one to Barbara. The recipe was better with my improvements. Sometimes revenge doesn't taste like victory. Sometimes it tastes like letting go, like growth. Like the meals we create when we finally stop cooking to please others and start cooking for ourselves.